what the next step will be is using this system to identify, okay, where are the Russian operational range centers of gravity? How do we take it a level beyond simply, we're going to waste a bunch of Russians that are 5 kilometers in front of the front line or 10 kilometers in the front line? It's no, instead of destroying 30 infantrymen in the field right in front of us, let's destroy 30 infantrymen while they're at a operational assembly area, beyond the view of the horizon, sort of thing. So that'll be the next step. And then, of course, right, you're right, Philip. After that would be, we've degraded the adversary in depth. Now, how do we restore maneuver to the battlefield? Now, I think that's much, much further along. But this is heading in a positive direction.
So for those that are listening that don't know what the Delta system is, can you give us a very quick overview as to what it is, and then what it's doing? I want to ask you a question on that as well.
Sure. So Delta's it's essentially a piece of software, and what it does is it allows for command and control and a common operating picture. So even if you're a general sitting in a command post somewhere, or a frontline soldier who's looking at a cell phone or a tablet or something, all of the enemy targets, all the information of the enemy, all the information about friendly forces and friendly assets, it's all there in real time on the same in the same software. And of course, all of the drones and cameras and sensors that the Ukrainians have established to collect data, collect information, that's also brought into Delta as well. And so what it allows is greater situational awareness. And it's important just to know who's on your left, who's on your right, who's ahead of you, who's behind you, what's the status of all your assets. That's essentially what Delta does. And Delta is actually very interesting in terms of command and control software, because unlike what we have in NATO and in the West, it's actually all built on open architecture. It is not living in some secret black box, super classified cloud, or not a cloud, sorry, like an on-site, on-premises deployment. It lives actually in the cloud. And so that actually, there's a debate about how should these sort of systems be architecturally set up, but I think it's actually a good thing that it's in the cloud and it's open architecture, because it makes it agnostic. It makes it very easy to integrate with a variety of platforms, a variety of sensors. The one problem about these super secret on-premise deployment systems is that they're usually established by a prime contractor, and then to integrate other things into it is a massive pain. And when you go with this open architecture, it's much more flexible, arguably at the expense of operational security. But I think what the Ukrainians are doing is necessary, and it's quite good. And it's something that the U.S. Department of War, U.S. Department of Defense is very much allergic to at this time.
Yeah, when you say large contractor and integrating being associated with pain, that pain just means a big check, a big price tag of millions of dollars to get it in. But two things with that. Then surely the Ukrainians are concerned that some of the handsets that the Delta systems on could fall into the Russian hands and give the Russians that visibility of Ukrainian defenses. Is that not something, or are there mechanisms built into to stop that from happening?
They have pretty good C2, or pardon me, counterintelligence. They have a way to be able to control the access and do that sort of thing. They've been using Delta since at least 2016. I think it was being developed immediately after the invasion in 2014, 2015. So this is a mature system. It's up to NATO standards. It can talk to the NATO systems as well. So this has not been sort of like a jerry-rigged deployment since 2022. They've been maturing it for a decade at this point.
And you were describing the impact that it's having with all the different commands, being able to look at this common operating picture, common targeting picture, and everything else. What it seems to me is that is enabling the Ukrainians now to make that proper maneuver from a static defensive position into more of a maneuverist force that can apply maneuverist doctrine on the battlefield, and therefore that's something that we'll start to see benefits from over the coming weeks and months.
Not weeks and months. That's too fast. But yes, you're exactly right. Such a system is an important prerequisite for getting out of the positional warfare. I think what the next steps are likely going to be are, okay, so now it's mandatory that all the units use it, but it's not yet mandatory that all of the units use the SOPs and TTPs and best practices associated with the system. So now it's actually, okay, how do we get the commanders and the command staff to actually not just use it because they have to in a perfunctory manner, but actually embrace the data-driven warfighting that it can enable. So that's sort of the next step. Then after that, we'll be getting out of a reactive mindset. My rough understanding is that the vast majority of Ukrainian units, not all of them, but many of the maneuver warfighting units that hold sectors of the line, they're mostly reactive. That is, they respond to killing the Russians that enter into their area of responsibility. Their work is mostly reactive, is mostly not proactive in finding and fixing and destroying them before they actually come forward. Of course, these are not 100% ratios. Some units do it more than others. There are certain missions that where some Ukrainian forces do that, but by and large, they're mostly reactive. And I think what the next step will be is using this system to identify, okay, where are the Russian operational range centers of gravity? How do we go? How do we take it a level beyond simply we're going to waste a bunch of Russians that are 5 kilometers in front of the front line or 10 kilometers in the front line? It's no. Instead of destroying 30 infantrymen in the field right in front of us, let's destroy 30 infantrymen while they're at an operational assembly area, beyond the view of the horizon, sort of thing. So that'll be the next step. And then, of course, right, you're right, Philip. After that would be we've degraded the adversary in depth. Now, how do we restore maneuver to the battlefield? Now, I think that's much, much further along. Um, but this is heading in a positive direction, slowly but surely.
Well, the other interesting lesson that comes out of what you've just described is that when it comes to the West investing in the lessons that are coming out of the Ukraine war and how we apply things, it's not something that you can pick up and run with quickly. What you described, the Ukrainians have been developing now since 2016, you say. So we're into 10 years of development, and it's going to take another period of time before the starts to change, because the cultural use of new kit and new tools is as important to be able to use them properly. And this is something that we in the West, as we adapt our militaries to this new developing threat and everything else, need to recognize, and our governments need to invest early so that we've got that time to make sure our culture can catch up in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been very interesting to watch the long span of Delta, because I recall back in 2016, 2017, there were fights that the U.S. Army was having about what system should become the backbone for Ukrainian command and control. And of course, the American contractors and the U.S. Army, they were trying to plug in some, you know, prime contractor solution, what the U.S. Army uses, and the Ukrainians were really passionate about this Delta system they had indigenously built on a homegrown platform, and Delta's won out, and it exists. It's here. It survived. It's battle proven. I think it does things that the U.S. programs cannot do. Actually, it's interoperable with NATO. So, you know, these sort of lessons take decades to learn, but
Yeah, fantastic. No, it sounds exciting. Now, getting on to what's going on the front line at the moment, that's something that you study on a daily basis. But I was only reading some commentary coming out where on Russian Telegram they're reporting that the Ukrainians have managed to punch through an element up to 18 kilometers in the Zaporizhia region. Now, it's only the Russian Telegram channels have put this out. Whether it is accurate, whether it's disinformation, or what. There's so much disinformation on about what's going on the front line. Things that are facts. Prokrovsk still hasn't fallen. The Russians aren't making massive breakthroughs anywhere. The Ukrainians are holding the line, or at the very least, on balance of reports that I'm seeing, seem to be pushing forward slightly more. You've got a greater insight. What is going on?
yeah, this is a great question, and it's certainly become very popular on like Twitter over the last 48 hours. So, couple of interesting things here, real quick. Bottom line up front, we have not collected any open source evidence to assess that the Ukrainians have advanced 16, 18 kilometers in the Zaporizhia direction. I know the reports that you're talking about. I've seen some of the Russian military blogger Telegram reports that are talking about this, but I think there's actually an explanation of what's going on here. Um, the Russian Telegram bloggers and military sources have for months, and in fact for years, but in this particular sector in Zaporizhia for months, have been lying about their performance. They've been embellishing their performance. They've been putting forward maps of the purported front line that are much further ahead of what ISW assesses, what other organizations assesses, what the available combat footage and visual evidence can suggest. And now what seems to be happening is we're having a retroactive Russian correction. And so the Russian maps at this stage have gotten about 15, 20 kilometers give or take ahead of reality. And now to save face, the Russians are actually um, let's call it adjusting their assessment by retrograding their lines back. And what they're claiming is that there's a counterattack. The Ukrainians are attacking us. They penetrate our lines, that sort of thing. Here's what the new line is looking like. I'm sure you've seen that map with the red and the blue ink and that sort of thing. And what's very interesting is that if you actually compare the battlefield geometry of those new lines from the supposed Ukrainian counteroffensive, it actually lines up pretty closely with where the lines have more or less statically been for the past several weeks, actually. And so this seems to be more of a how the Russians are deciding to solve their problem of having overconfidently stated what the front line is, and now they're correcting it.
Overconfidently is a good word, but there are financial incentives and medal incentives and other things for the Russian commanders to say that they're getting further ahead, which is why we see them running forward, putting a little flag up, taking a photograph, and geolocating it, sending it back. Surely with this sort of correction, there's going to be penalties that'll come in. Are we expecting some Russian commanders to take up window cleaning and fall out of ninth floor windows?
I think at this tactical level, probably not, because these sort of tactical blunders don't make it very high up the chain. I think these are sort of going to be like company, platoon, maybe regimental or brigade level issues at absolute highest. But this is tactical stuff. We're talking about 5 or tens of kilometers in rural fields that are not decisive for current operations, and neither the main Russian area of responsibility. The kinds of failures that do actually result with problems and generals getting demoted or falling out of windows and such are major operational failures. I mean, things like the loss of Kupiansk, the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv in 2022, or commanders who receive and build such a terrible reputation over a long protracted time. There have been, for example, regimental and brigade commanders who are become infamous for just simply sending droves and droves of men to their deaths, or really blundering quite badly tactical scenarios. There was a failed river crossing in Luhansk or Donetsk back in 2022, for example, in Bielorivka, where a battalion's worth of tanks and armored personnel carriers were destroyed in a botched river crossing. And so I think the commander who was in charge of that got into trouble because of that. So, but this sort of thing, I think they'll probably it'll be swept under the rug.
Thank you for watching Frontline. Now, in case you haven't heard, we've got our own channel now. So please like, subscribe whenever subscriptions start again. But of course, you can still listen to us if you want to on Times Radio at 01:35 hours in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time. But that is 20:35 Eastern Standard Time for those in the United States. And of course, please put your comments in and share our link with your friends. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.